Hello, welcome to the EPG Pathshala project. This is the module on African and Caribbean prose and poetry. Today, we will be looking at the novel Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. We will look at the background of the author, parts 1, 2 and 3 of the novel, the main characters in the novel and key themes within this novel. Module 1, Introduction. John Rhys was born Ella Gwendoline Rhys William on 24th of August 1890 in the Caribbean island of Dominica. Her father was a Welsh doctor and her mother a Creole of Scottish ancestry. At the age of 16, Rhys moved to England for education, but she was unable to assimilate into the English culture because of her outsider status and her accent. She joined the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, desiring to be an actor, but her teachers deemed her unfit for the stage. Unable to find appropriate training and unwilling to return to the Caribbean, she experimented with a variety of jobs. She worked as a nude model, a writer, a volunteer, a pension office worker, and even adopted a gamut of lifestyles. She was a mistress to a wealthy stockbroker. She was what is called a demi-monde, and among many other things, she also married several men and lived an interesting life. Two of her three husbands died, and one was convicted for tax fraud. In 1924, influenced by Ford Madox Ford, Rhys began writing. She would later move in with Ford and his girlfriend, and an affair would ensue. John Rhys's major works include Voyage in the Dark, published in 1934, Wide Sargasso Sea in 1966, and an unfinished autobiography published posthumously and titled Smile Please, an Unfinished Autobiography. She also wrote several short story collections. Module 2, Introduction to the novel Wide Sargasso Sea. Wide Sargasso Sea was published in 1966 after a long break in the author's career after her first book had been published. It was immediately recognized as an important contribution to Caribbean writing and won the W. H. Smith Literary Award in 1967. Rhys had intended the novel to be a prequel to Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre. She wanted to provide voice and historical context to Bronte's Bertha or Mad Woman in the Attic. While Bronte's novel depicts the young Jane's encounter with a mysterious yet fascinating Rochester, Rhys enables the reader to read into his role in driving his wife into madness. By discussing the Creole status, troubled past, and constant struggle for identity by Antonia, Kosova, Rhys brings to focus more complex histories of England and Jamaica. The work has served to highlight the effect of race and gender inequality amongst Creoles and the inadequacy of political measures alone when it comes to addressing these complex social problems. Because of its location within a matrix of both post-emancipation changes in Jamaica and gendered hierarchies amongst Creoles, it has enabled discussions on the discrimination of blacks towards the white niggers left behind and inflect feminist debates with the debate on race discrimination. The novel can be termed both post-colonial and feminist because of these interventions that it makes. Module 3, Summary of the novel. The novel is divided into three parts. Part 1 describes the childhood of Antoniette Mason. The voice of Antoniette tells the reader of her life as a young Antoniette Kosova, a young girl who lives on a ruined estate called Colby, near Spanish Town, Jamaica. Her mother, Annette, is described as a beautiful Creole woman from the island of Martinique. The novel is set around the year 1834, when the slaves received emancipation, but Jamaica witnessed large-scale social turmoil owing to the new social dynamics emerging between former slaves and owners. Kosova is an arrogant, drunk, white slave owner who has had many bastard children. When he dies, he leaves the family and the estate impoverished. After Kosova dies, Annette devotes most of her time and energy to Pierre, Antonius's brother. Pierre appears to be suffering from cerebral palsy as he is described as having difficulty in walking and talking. The neighbors and people in the village do not mix with them. Mr. Luttrell, one of the only people who talked to them, commits suicide and they are left to fend for themselves completely. The other members of the household are Christophine, who is a Martinique woman like Annette and was a wedding gift from Kosovo to Annette. Christophine is described as a black woman who wore gold earrings and tied a handkerchief around her head with 2 points in front in Martinique style. The blacks in the village were afraid of her because she was believed to practice the black magic of Obeah. Annette looks to Christophine for love and support. Neither woman is fully accepted in Jamaica. Young Antoniette is left very much to her own. Antoniette's childhood is poor and lonely. People in the town refer to them as white cockroaches. Antoniette cannot even walk down the street without the other children teasing and taunting her. Since she doesn't have any friends, Christophine arranges for Antoniette to play with a black child, Tia, whose mother is also a newcomer to Jamaica. The two children meet and swim almost every day. One day, they have a bet about doing somersaults, and although Antoniette does them, they quarrel about money, and Tia goes off wearing Antoniette's dress and taking all her pennies. Antoniette is forced to go home in Tia's untidy dress. When she reaches home, she finds that her mother is entertaining visitors and is very embarrassed to see her in such bad clothes. Once the guests leave, Annette orders Christophine to burn the dress. Where Annette had become distant and lonely after Kosovo's death, the arrival of new visitors seems to lend her a new vigor. Annette soon begins to have a renewed interest in life. After the fight with Tia, Antoniette no longer has any friends, but she finds company in nature, saying, "It's better than people." Soon, Annette marries Mr. Mason, an extremely wealthy widower who had come to the island to cash in on the failing economy. Antoniette is seen to be suspicious of the white man and refers to him as a serpent in the Garden of Eden. However, with his arrival, Colbury gets a facelift, and some servants like SAS, who had left, came back because of the smell of money. While Annette and Mr. Mason are on honeymoon, Antoniette stays with Aunt Cora. When they return, Antoniette describes the place as looking better but feeling the same. Although there are some changes, the life they faced remains essentially the same. They were hardly accepted by the locals and faced gossip and hostility everywhere. Annette soon grows tired of the jealous gossip about her and wants to leave the estate. But Mr. Mason doesn't agree. Even though she points out the danger from the black slaves and suggests they move to England, Mr. Mason brushes aside all her fears. Annette grows more and more restless and worried about her children, but her appeals fall on deaf ears. One day, however, the house is targeted by angry slaves and Pierre is fatally injured when his maid abandons him. Seeing her son suffocate to death, Annette loses her mental balance and attacks Mr. Mason. She is unable to even see Antoniette as it reminds her of Pierre. Antoniette is sent to a convent school by Aunt Cora. Mr. Mason goes back to England and visits occasionally. He brings her presents, bracelets, a very nice dress, etc., attempting to make up for what he had done to her mother. Annette dies one day, and the novel ends with the young Antoniette reflecting the things that had happened and the death of her mother. Part 2. Part 2 is the longest section of the book. The voice in this part is mainly Rochester's, the character from Jane Eyre. although his name is never actually mentioned. The marriage between Antoniette and Rochester has already taken place. They are on honeymoon in the Windward Islands on an estate called Grandbois or Large Wood. This had belonged to Antoniette's mother. Rochester had agreed to come to Jamaica on the urging of Mr. Mason and had entered into a hasty marriage with Antoniette because he was to receive a large dowry of £30,000. As the second son of his father, he stood to inherit nothing under the laws of primogeniture and had already run up a sizable debt in England. He had been in Jamaica only a month, 3 weeks of which were spent in bed with fever, when his marriage to Antoniette was solemnized. Since the old man Mason had died before he reached Jamaica, the elder son Richard had made all the arrangements. Antoniette was not too happy with the sudden marriage and had wanted to back out, but the prospect of money made Rochester convince her to go ahead. However, he is hardly the most sincere husband. Even before the honeymoon begins, the readers see him being attracted to Amelie, a servant girl accompanying them. He thinks of her as a creature, not a person, indicating his racial prejudice. On the walk to the honeymoon house, Rochester thinks of himself as having been trapped into a horrible mistake when ironically it was he who was eager for the marriage. Rochester is overwhelmed by the scenery of the Caribbean, distrustful of the servants, and generally displeased with the honeymoon house. However, Antoniette manages to reassure him. They enter a period of bliss and pleasure in each other. Rochester doesn't feel any tenderness of love towards Antoniette. He describes himself as one consumed by an animal passion. Soon he receives a letter from Daniel Cosby, Antoniette's illegitimate brother, warning him of the madness that runs in the family. Rochester believes what he reads, even though Daniel's accusations about Antoniette's incestuous relation with her cousin Sandy and his demands for money to keep all this a secret disgust Rochester. He wants to believe all he has heard. He begins to view Antoniette with suspicion, and his attitude towards her changes. The narration shifts to Antoniette's voice, and the reader sees her troubled by the shift in Rochester's attitude. She begs her former nurse, Christophine, to use black magic to make him love her again. Christophine initially refuses. She had never approved of Rochester. But when she hears that under the English law, all of Antoniette's money now belongs to Rochester, she relents and gives her a powder. The narration shifts back to Rochester, who is seen secretly meeting Daniel Cosby. When he returns, Antoniette questions him and is shocked by the accusations made against her. Antoniette begins to explain her family history to him, but in doing so becomes very emotional and angry. At night, Antoniette drugs him into sleeping with her. When he awakens, he is sickened and vomits several times. Realizing what has happened, Rochester is furious. As revenge, he seduces Amelie even while his wife was in the next room and could hear them. In the morning, he offers her money and Amelie says she will start a new life with it in Rio. Antoniette leaves the house distraught, only to return completely out of control a few days later. Christophine too arrives and attempts to make Rochester leave Antoniette. She says she will travel with her and take care of her till the last days. When Christophine mentions that Antoniette may yet find another husband, Rochester is enraged and jealous. The oppressive nature of his manhood is revealed when he is simultaneously disgusted by Antoniette and at the same time doesn't want her to flourish on her own. Rochester decides to take Antoniette with him to England for medical treatment. Part 2 ends with the two of them leaving the island. Rochester vows Antoniette would never return to the Caribbean. Let's now move to part 3 of the novel. Part 3 opens with Grace Poole describing the state of affairs in Rochester's household in England. Antoniette is locked away in the attic. Rochester has inherited the mansion after the death of both his father and brother. Rochester has Mrs. Elf, the caretaker, pay Grace Poole double her wages to keep Antoniette's presence a secret. He dismisses all but a fraction of the staff at the mansion. Grace Poole has a weakness for drink and also can't keep secrets well. She soon tells Leah, another servant, about Antoniette. She often passes out drunk, enabling Antoniette to steal the keys and slip out. The new environment of England appears dreary to Antoniette, who is used to the lush green Caribbean. Her sense of place and identity appear blurred. She is unable to believe that she is in England and imprisoned. England had always represented freedom to her, and going there was meant to give her a better life. She feels angry, confused, and disoriented. When her brother Richard comes to see her, he is hardly able to recognize the dishevelled woman he sees. Antoniette is enraged at him for leaving her in this condition and for handing all her money to Rochester. She attacks Richard with a knife and has to be restrained with ropes. One night, like several nights before, Antoniette dreams that she steals the keys from Grace, lets herself out into the passage to the rest of the house, and moves along carrying candles. She dreams she is in a chapel that looks like Aunt Cora's house. Soon, in the dream, there is a wall of flame behind her. Moving away from the flame and the sounds of yelling, Antoniette goes back upstairs, out to where she watches the red sky and sees fragments of her past life flash before her. She sees Tia taunting her from the ground and coaxing her to jump. In the dream, Antoniette is about to jump. She wakes, screaming from her dream. Feeling that she must enact the dream, she steals Grace's keys and heads down the passage with a candle in her hand. The ending is left open, and the reader can offer an alternative to the well-known consequence of Antoniette's desire to burn the house down, as it is immortalized in Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre. Module 4: Characters. Antoniette Cosby Mason Rochester. The protagonist, Antoniette, is a character based on the madwoman in the attic from Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Antoniette and her family of white Creoles are forced to flee from their estate. The death of her brother pushes Antoniette's mother over the edge. Antoniette is coerced into an early marriage with a nameless English gentleman who only marries her for money and is consumed by animalistic desires devoid of any love. Antoniette, like her mother before her, is pushed to the brink of madness. She is also referred to as Bertha by Rochester. The novel depicts Antoniette as a young Creole woman faced with the sharp contrasts in life, the lack of resolution of which causes her descent into madness. The other character, Annette Kasavin Mason. She is described as a beautiful Creole woman from Martinique. She arrives in Jamaica after marriage to her white slave-owning husband, Alexander Cosby. The wayward habits of Cosby, the harsh attitudes of black Jamaicans towards her, and the lack of friends drive her to depression. After Kosovo's death, she has to struggle to survive both financially and socially. She is seen as having a keen awareness of the role black servants play in her life and is grateful for their services. When Mr. Mason, her second husband, disparages them, she defends them as though she and her family have had a tough time due to the blacks. She is capable of enjoying life, and when possible, she rides her horse, socializes with neighbors who talk to her, and manages her household. However, the race and gender inequality she faces leave her little room for growth. She is devoted to her son, and his avoidable death pushes her over the brink. Pierre Cosby is Antoniette's brother, who is suffering from cerebral palsy. He is the chief concern for his mother, and his death triggers her descent into madness. Christophine Dubois, the black Martinique servant who was a wedding gift for Annette. She is a loving servant but plays many other roles too. She takes care of Antoniette like a mother, giving her pennies, bathing her, and finding her friends. She looks out for Annette, warning her of dangers. The blacks are afraid of her because she practices Obeya magic. Even in the end, we see her pleading for the freedom of Antoniette and offering to take care of her like her own child. Only the threat of imprisonment makes her relent vis-à-vis Rochester. Alexander Kosova, he is the white slave-owning husband of Annette and owner of Colbury. He is believed to have taken many black women as mistresses and would reward them with houses and lands. When Daniel confronts him and asks to be recognized as a legitimate heir, he laughs and ridicules him. In the end, he is said to have died a raving lunatic, indicating that madness ran in his genes. He leaves little behind for his family. Mr. Luttrell, the owner of Nelson's Rest and one of Annette's only friends, he suffers severe financial hardship due to the emancipation and one day shoots his dog and swims out to sea to never return. His distant relatives soon claim the place, and like him, they are also very pleasing people. Godfrey and SAS, they are the two black servants at Colbury. Godfrey is feared by Antoniette because he found her mother's dead horse. SAS is the less loyal of the two, going away when he sees the fortunes of the estate dwindling and returning when Colbury seems prosperous after Mr. Mason's arrival. His real name is Disastrous Thomas because his grandmother liked the word disastrous. Tia, Antoniette's childhood friend, Tia shares food, playtime, and all activities with Antoniette until they have a fight one day. Like Antoniette, Tia's mother too is a foreigner in Jamaica. She steals Antoniette's clothes and money and goes away. The night of the fire at Colbury, she throws a rock at Antoniette's face and then starts crying herself. She appears in Antoniette's dreams, taunting her and asking her to jump off the building. Mr. Mason, Annette Kosova's second husband, he had come to Jamaica to cash in on the failing economy and wanted to inherit Colbury estate. He married Annette only for her wealth and had no intention of protecting the family. His ill-advised actions lead to the death of Pierre and Annette's descent into madness. He returns to England and tries to make amends with Antoniette by buying her presents and arranging a marriage for her. He represents the prejudiced and greedy white man seeking only profits from the land and people. Richard Mason, Mr. Mason's eldest son. He steps in for his father to arrange Antoniette's marriage. It is his lack of prudence that results in Antoniette losing all her money and security through marriage to Rochester. Although he was warned by Aunt Cora against giving all of Antoniette's wealth to Rochester without proper protection for her, he does nothing to ensure that his sister has a secure future. Antoniette is enraged with his behavior and wants to kill him. Even after she slips into madness, he does nothing to protect her. Aunt Cora. It is unclear whether Aunt Cora is related by blood or by marriage to Antoniette. She is, however, the only stable guardian she has. She takes care of her in childhood, arranges education for her, and argues on her behalf with Richard Mason. Antoniette describes her husband as someone who wouldn't let her write to them or visit them. After her husband's death, Aunt Cora returns to the West Indies. She also gives Antoniette a bag containing her rings in case the girl ever needed money. She is able to do very little to protect Antoniette. Sandy Kosova. He is one of Alexander Kosova's bastard sons and Antoniette's favorite cousin. Although Daniel's accusations of an incestuous relation between Antoniette and Sandy are never proved, We do see Antoniette reminiscing in England about cousin Sandy's farewell kiss. He also rescues her in difficult situations with the black kids in the neighborhood. Mr. Rochester, Antoniette's unnamed husband and a major character in Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre. He is a white Englishman whose marriage to the Creole woman Antoniette is arranged by Mr. Mason and later Richard. He marries for money and then behaves as if he has been tricked. He hates the Caribbean and is unfaithful and malicious. He is unwilling to free Antoniette or to love her, making her unstable, and her position in Jamaican society extends into her own home. His actions lead Antoniette to the path of madness. Amelie, the servant girl, seduces Antoniette's husband. Her knowing looks and smiles lead Rochester to believe that she recognizes that he has been cheated into marriage. She once suggests that Rochester is tiring of the honeymoon and is slapped by Antoniette. She seeks revenge by sleeping with Rochester and plans to use the gift money he offers to start a new life in Rio with her sister. Daniel Kosovy. Like Sandy, he is Alexander Kosovy's illegitimate son. He confronts Kosovy for his inheritance but is laughed at and feels humiliated. He vows revenge by maligning Antoniette and is the instrument of estrangement between Rochester and Antoniette. He calls himself Isu and claims it is his Christian duty to warn Rochester about the madness in Antoniette's genes. He is depicted as a man of no principles, a half-breed and good for nothing. He even tries to blackmail Rochester into giving him money. Grace Poole, the servant in charge of watching Antoniette at Thornfield Hall in Rochester Mansion. She has a weakness for drink and can't keep Antoniette's presence a secret even after being paid handsomely for it. She is made to believe that Rochester is a kind and good master who is forced into the present situation of caring for his mentally ill wife. Her negligence and carelessness lead to Antoniette laying hands on many dangerous weapons like knives, stealing down the house at night, and even burning it down before jumping to her death. Let us now move to some themes in the novel. The first theme that we see in the novel is that of racial inequality. The racial tensions present in Jamaica in the early 19th century are brought to life in the novel through the stories of Annette and Antoniette. The abysmal position of the Creole in the newly emerging race dynamic of post-emancipation Jamaica is a testimony of the incompleteness and inadequacy of political measures with respect to race discrimination. The relation between Kosova and the black slaves and their children reflects one side of the story of race in Jamaica. Racial exploitation by white slave owners was rampant pre-1834. Kosova and others like him looked down on the slaves and used them for whatever ends that suited them. After they had done with the slaves, they would discard them without any intention of compensation. Kosova even followed the pattern for the female slaves that he took as his mistresses. On the other hand, the white nigger population of Creoles like Annette and Antoinette, who occupied a better position than the blacks in society, also had to face a lot of problems due to their Creole status. Annette was very acutely aware of the services of her black servants and she was grateful for it. She stood up for them when Mr. Mason ridiculed them. In spite of this, they received hostility from the local populations. Thus, post-emancipation Jamaica offers a good setting to study the consequences of political emancipation of various groups. Another important theme in the novel is the theme of madness. The repeated references to madness in various characters makes this an important theme in the novel. Kosova, a drunken slave owner, is said to have died a raving lunatic, and also believed to have madness in his genes. Annette's progression from aloofness and depression into complete madness as her life takes various turns from bad to worse brings into focus the link between womanhood and madness. When her son dies, she loses all semblance of balance and is yet again abandoned by Mr. Mason, who goes back to England. The uncanny repetition of events with Antoniette demonstrates the helplessness of women, especially in financial and legal aspects with respect to their husbands. Left with none to turn to or nowhere to escape, Antoniette loses her mind and is overcome with a desire to destroy everything that was destroying her. Madness thus becomes the representative condition of the Creole stuck in no man's land between whites and blacks. Unable to move beyond this binary and severely disadvantaged in both white and black contexts, the Creole woman snaps under the pressure of patriarchy and racial inequality. Let us conclude this module. White Sargasso Sea serves to highlight the politics of the English literary canon with its alternate take on the life and personality of the unnamed husband of Antonia. By providing a racial context and history to the voiceless Bertha, Rhys is able to foreground the hidden violence that accompanied the establishment of the literary canon, which was a key instrument of empire. The mysterious romance of Bronte's novel is replaced with a keen awareness of the context of events. Antoniette Kosova's journey from Jamaica to England and descent into madness examines the role of racial prejudice and chauvinism in creating a compromised role for women in society. The novel thus acts as a counterpoint for the facade regarding society which had been created by Victorian writing. So, in this module, we have examined in detail the novel White Sargasso Sea. We have seen the background of the author, John Rhys, her own troubled past in the Dominican Republic and in England. We have seen the inspiration for her writing the novel, the complex history of the novel connected to the Victorian novel Jane Eyre, the different parts of the novel, and the more important themes of racial inequality and madness within the novel.